Welcome to the Motherland Manifesto. This channel is a voice for truth, liberation, and the future of Africa. The uncomfortable truth. Let me start with something that might sound harsh. Not loud, not angry, just honest. Most modern Africans are afraid of their own ancestors. We don't say it out loud. We don't admit it in public. But it shows in how we laugh, how we talk, and how we watch movies. For many people alive today, the first time they ever met African spirituality was not through an elder, not through history, not through understanding. It was through a Nollywood movie. And in that movie, the shrine was dark, the priest was evil, the ritual was dangerous, and the message was clear. This is something to run from. Now think about that. Imagine if the only movies you ever saw about a religion showed it as horror. Imagine if every time it appeared on screen, it was connected to blood, fear, and punishment. After a while, your brain wouldn't need convincing anymore. You would already know how to feel. That's how storytelling works. Stories don't ask permission. They enter quietly and settle in the mind. And Nollywood has been one of the biggest storytellers Africa has ever had. Which means Nollywood did not just entertain us, it trained us. How stories shape the mind. Every culture teaches its children who they are through stories. Before television, African societies passed knowledge through oral tradition. Elders told stories that explained the world, where we came from, how we should live, what we should respect. Stories were not just for fun. They were instruction manuals for identity. Then cinema arrived. And cinema is stronger than oral storytelling because it adds pictures. It adds sound. It adds emotion. It adds repetition. And repetition is powerful. If you hear something once, you might forget it. If you see it 100 times, it becomes normal. If you see it 1,000 times, it becomes truth. For many young Africans growing up in cities, Nollywood replaced the village storyteller. The screen became the new elder. But the elder was afraid of tradition, so the children learned fear. Not from colonizers directly, from their own screens. And that is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable. Because this is not about blaming outsiders. This is about what we did to ourselves. The inheritance we never questioned. There is something important we need to understand. Nollywood did not wake up one day and decide to attack African spirituality. The industry inherited a way of seeing the world that was already damaged. During colonial times, European missionaries and filmmakers described African religion as darkness. They called it primitive. They called it evil. They said salvation meant abandoning it. That message was repeated for generations. Then independence came. The flags changed, the governments changed, but the stories did not fully change. The camera changed hands, the script stayed familiar. When Nollywood was born in the 1990s, many of its creators had already grown up hearing that traditional spirituality was something shameful. So when they made films, they didn't think they were attacking culture. They thought they were telling the truth, and that's the scary part. The most powerful beliefs are the ones we don't realize we inherited. We think they are ours. The double standard nobody talks about. Now let me say something that everyone notices, but few people say clearly. Nollywood is very careful with Christianity. It is careful with Islam, but it is reckless with African spirituality. You rarely see a mainstream film that openly mocks Islam. You rarely see Christianity portrayed as a horror system that must be escaped. Even when religion is criticized, there is caution. There are lines filmmakers know not to cross. Why? Because they know there will be consequences. Communities will react. Institutions will respond. There is power behind those religions. But African spirituality? No central authority. No global institution. No organized defense. So it becomes safe to attack, safe to exaggerate, safe to demonize. Cinema respects power. It always has. And when a system is repeatedly shown as weak, cinema pushes harder against it. This is not random. This is how representation follows power. Think about how many Nollywood stories follow the same pattern. Someone wants wealth. They visit a shrine. They perform a ritual. Something terrible happens. They suffer. Then they escape by rejecting tradition. We have seen this script so many times that we barely notice it anymore. The shrine becomes a factory of evil. The priest becomes a villain. The deity becomes a demon wearing African clothing. And after decades of repetition, the message sinks in. African spirituality equals danger. Not sometimes, not in certain cases, but almost always. That is not storytelling variety. That is narrative discipline. When one image appears again and again, it stops being fiction. It becomes a cultural reflex. We don't question it, we react to it automatically. And that is how shame is manufactured. Quietly, repeatedly, until it feels natural. The joke that hides the wound. Today we see the next stage of this story on social media. Young creators make skits mocking village life. The accent is exaggerated, the elder is foolish, the shrine is comedy. The audience laughs, and everyone says, it's just humor. But humor is never just humor. Humor tells you what a society is comfortable laughing at. When people laugh at their own roots without understanding them, something deeper is happening. They are performing distance. They are saying, I am not that. I am modern. I am safe from that embarrassment. And the algorithm rewards it. Mock tradition, arrow, get views. Exaggerate ignorance, arrow, get money. Turn culture into parody, arrow, go viral. So the cycle continues. Not because people hate their culture consciously, but because mockery sells. And over time, a generation grows up learning that the easiest way to belong is to laugh at where they came from. That is not harmless. That is identity training. The silence of the elders. Now here's another uncomfortable question. Where are the guardians of culture? Where are the elders in this media space? Many traditional institutions today exist only symbolically. They no longer shape the main narrative. Universities talk about culture in classrooms, but cinema shapes the masses, and cinema moves faster than scholarship. When those who understand tradition do not enter storytelling spaces, others fill the gap. And those others are guided by market forces, not preservation. Profit does not protect memory, it packages it, and whatever sells becomes the version of history that survives. Civilizations don't disappear loudly, they fade through neglect. Let me be clear, this is not an attack on Nollywood as an enemy. Nollywood is a mirror. It reflects the fears, beliefs, and contradictions already present in society. But mirrors do not just reflect, they reinforce. And when a society repeatedly sees itself through a distorted mirror, the distortion becomes identity. The question is not whether African spirituality should be beyond criticism. No culture is above examination. The question is why examination turned into caricature, and why caricature became normal. Because once distortion feels normal, a people can inherit shame without realizing it. And inherited shame is one of the quietest weapons against a civilization.
What this did to our minds. The quiet damage. Let's go deeper, because the real damage of storytelling is not what happens on screen. It's what happens inside the viewer. When a child repeatedly sees their ancestral culture framed as evil, something subtle happens. The child doesn't stand up and say, I reject my heritage. It's quieter than that. They learn discomfort. They learn that certain symbols are embarrassing. Certain accents are backward. Certain traditions belong in horror films, not in real life. And discomfort grows into distance. Distance grows into shame. Shame grows into silence. This is how a culture disappears without anyone burning books or banning rituals. It fades from the inside. People stop defending it because they don't fully understand it. They only know the version they saw on screen, and the screen told them it was dangerous. The split identity. Many modern Africans live with a quiet split inside them. On one side, pride in being African. On the other side,
fear of being too traditional. We celebrate culture in fashion, music, and food. Those are safe. They are colorful. They are marketable. But when the conversation moves to spirituality or philosophy, the mood changes. People laugh nervously. They dismiss it. They call it outdated. Why? Because for decades, cinema trained us to associate indigenous spirituality with moral failure. It was never framed as a system of thought. It was framed as a threat to escape. So a strange situation emerges. We love the aesthetic of our culture, but we distrust its mind. We wear the clothes, we dance the dances, but we reject the worldview that created them. That is a cultural fracture, and fractures weaken identity. The global comparison. Look at how other civilizations treat their past. European cinema explores Greek mythology with seriousness. Norse gods become global franchises. Ancient philosophies become blockbuster narratives. Nobody assumes those stories are primitive. They are treated as intellectual heritage. Asian cinema does the same with Buddhist, Taoist, and Shinto traditions. These systems are examined, questioned, and dramatized, but rarely reduced to pure horror. Even when conflict appears, complexity remains. Africa is different. Our ancient systems rarely receive that level of curiosity. Instead, they are simplified into danger. It's not that Africa lacks philosophical depth. It's that our storytelling industry rarely pauses to explore it. And what is not explored intellectually gets dismissed emotionally. People don't fear what they understand. They fear what has been simplified into a monster. The economy of fear. Fear is profitable. Horror sells. Shock attracts attention. And early Nollywood discovered that fear-based stories were cheap to produce and easy to distribute. A shrine set, dramatic music, exaggerated acting, and you have instant tension. The market rewarded the formula, so the formula multiplied. This is important. Much of the damage was not planned as cultural sabotage. It was economic convenience. But repeated convenience can produce long-term consequences. When an industry learns that a distorted image makes money, it keeps repeating the distortion. And audiences adapt. They stop expecting nuance. They expect spectacle. Over time, spectacle replaces understanding. And once that happens, correcting the narrative becomes harder, because complexity feels boring compared to fear. Laughter as protection. Notice how often people defend these portrayals by saying, "It's just entertainment." That sentence is a shield. It protects us from confronting the possibility that entertainment can shape belief. But history shows otherwise. Cinema has always shaped politics, gender roles, racial attitudes, and national identity. Stories are how societies rehearse reality. When we laugh at a caricature long enough, we stop recognizing the real thing. The caricature becomes the reference point. If the only version of African spirituality you've seen is exaggerated horror, your brain will treat that as the baseline. Even if you intellectually know it's fiction, the emotional imprint remains. And emotion guides behavior more than logic. The generational echo. Now imagine this happening across generations. Parents raised on fear-based films pass subtle discomfort to their children. They warn them away from tradition without explaining it. The children inherit suspicion without context. By the third generation, the original knowledge is gone. Only the fear remains. This is how cultural memory erodes, not through violence, through repetition of misunderstanding. And the tragedy is that many people defending these portrayals genuinely believe they are protecting society from harm. They think they are promoting morality. But morality built on distortion is unstable. It stands on a misunderstanding of history.
The culture we are erasing in real time. The uncomfortable responsibility. Let's remove the last layer of politeness. What we are watching is not harmless entertainment. We are watching a culture slowly cooperate in its own erasure. Not through violence, not through censorship, through ridicule. And ridicule is one of the most effective tools of destruction ever invented. You don't need to burn a tradition if you can convince its children to laugh at it. Once a people laugh at their roots long enough, they will abandon them willingly. No force required. That is where the real danger sits, not in hatred, but in casual dismissal. Because hatred can be resisted. Dismissal feels normal, and what feels normal is rarely questioned. The illusion of modernity. Many Africans believe distancing themselves from indigenous spirituality is a sign of progress. But let's examine that honestly. Progress is not the rejection of ancestry. Progress is the understanding of ancestry. Every civilization that commands global respect studies its past aggressively. Europe did not erase Greek philosophy to become modern. Asia did not abandon its metaphysics to industrialize. They modernized without amputating memory. Africa is attempting something more dangerous. We are trying to modernize by forgetting. And forgetting is not progress. It is vulnerability disguised as sophistication. A society that abandons its intellectual roots does not become stronger. It becomes easier to influence, easier to define from the outside, and easier to sell a borrowed identity to. That is not liberation. That is dependency with better branding. The betrayal nobody names. Here is the sharpest part of this conversation. When African creators repeatedly portray African spirituality as horror, they are not just making films. They are participating in a historical betrayal, not because they are evil, but because they are unexamined. Unexamined storytelling becomes cultural sabotage without intention, and intention does not erase consequence. If the only surviving images of your ancestors are demons and fools, future generations will not hate you for it. They will simply forget you. And forgetting is colder than hatred. Hatred still remembers. The audience cannot hide. It is easy to blame filmmakers, harder to blame viewers. But industries do not exist in isolation. They are fed by attention. Every ticket, every stream, every share is a vote. When distortion makes money, distortion multiplies, which means the audience is not a victim here. The audience is a participant, not malicious, not cruel, but complicit. Complicity does not require bad intentions. It only requires comfort. And comfort is the strongest ally of decline. A culture rarely collapses because its enemies are strong. It collapses because its defenders are relaxed. The future watching us. Imagine a child 100 years from now trying to understand 21st century Africa. They will not interview us. They will watch our films. Cinema is the archive we are leaving behind. If our dominant stories portray ancestral systems as monsters, that becomes the historical record. Not because it was true, but because it was filmed. History remembers what is documented more than what is lived. So the question is brutal but necessary. What are we teaching the future about ourselves? That we were ashamed? That we were afraid? That we found our own foundations embarrassing?
because archives do not explain context. They preserve images, and images outlive intentions. The final choice. This conversation is not about returning to the past. It is about deciding whether we are mature enough to look at it without flinching. A confident culture studies its roots. An insecure culture mocks them. Mockery is easier than understanding. It requires no research, no humility, no confrontation with complexity. It only requires distance. But distance has a cost. The further a people move from their memory, the easier it becomes to replace that memory with something convenient. And replaced memory produces replaceable people. That is the part no one likes to say out loud. A culture unsure of itself is easy to market to, easy to divide, and easy to redefine. Identity confusion is profitable. Clarity is dangerous.
In conclusion, a culture does not die when outsiders attack it. A culture dies when its children inherit a joke where their history should be. Right now, Africa is laughing, and the laughter sounds harmless. But underneath it is a question that will not disappear. When the jokes are finished, what will remain? If the answer is silence, then we did not lose our culture to invasion. We traded it for entertainment, and history will not call that tragedy. History will call it consent.